Greetings, listener. Thank you for joining me. My name is Sarah Fleschikowski, and I'm a first-year master's student in environmental studies at Queen's University. Today, I will be presenting my final project for Global Development Studies 872, Indigenous Theory. My undergraduate degree in the life sciences provided an interesting perspective for me to approach the study of Indigenous theory. The academic field of Indigenous theory is in its infancy and is difficult to define, as it is both an art and science and is incredibly interdisciplinary. According to the First Nations Studies program at the University of British Columbia, uppercase I, Indigenous, is used in a global context to describe peoples of long settlement and connection to specific lands who have been adversely affected by industrial economies, displacement, and settlement of their traditional territories by others. I don't think of Indigenous theory as the study of a particular group of people. I think of Indigenous in the context of this course as a natural quality, an adjective, that expresses living in accordance with all of creation, the land, the animals, the forces of nature, and other humans. This way of being is the most sustainable way to live, work, and play during our time on the physical earth. Referring to the syllabus presented during the first seminar, my project will most closely align with the course topic of Indigenous design, genetics, biology, and the original inconsistencies. My goal today is to demonstrate how studying Indigenous theory can profoundly change a settler scientist's understanding of their body. Re-indigenization is an ongoing, never-ending movement that is opposed by modernization, according to a book chapter by Lapp and Lovelace. Regular people can live more indigenously, and this is partly because humans, genetically, expect to be born into an indigenous world. Day and Lovelace describe the womb as an indigenous ecology, as a natural space, a small escape from modernity. Aside from the odd sounds and tastes from the outside world, a fetus in the womb is isolated. Humans are incredibly vulnerable as a species, and specifically as helpless infants who require much investment from family and community to reach adulthood. I believe that children are more able to live indigenously. Because they expect an indigenous world, they can more easily learn and unlearn, whereas a socialized adult in a colonial capitalist society, despite the predisposition to thrive in an indigenous world, has much less neural plasticity and cannot learn indigenous ways of being as effortlessly. Humans, as a species, are now abnormal in their environment. Gene-culture coevolution studies are consistent in their findings that human bodies are best suited to our ancestral environments. Very few human populations around the world remain isolated, unaffected by the rapid lifestyle shift away from cultural practices and country foods. Obesity is a new construction. Humans aren't meant to be eating diets of processed and fast foods and sitting for hours on end. Our bodies are themselves indigenous, craving an indigenous environment. The Journal of Medicine states that the systematic displacement from a very physically active lifestyle in our natural outdoor environment to a sedentary indoor lifestyle is at the root of many of the ubiquitous chronic diseases that are endemic in our culture. The intuitive solution is to simulate the indigenous human activity pattern to the extent that this is possible and practically achievable. A stunning example is provided in the paper titled Evolutionary Responses to a Constructed Niche, Ancient Mesoamericans as a Model of Gene-Culture Coevolution. Ancient Mesoamericans cultivating corn influenced their genotype, or genetic code, to promote energy storage and hold onto fats to avoid malnutrition. However, this thrifty genotype is no longer advantageous due to the widespread availability of high-fat foods. These highly specialized indigenous bodies are facing a higher risk of cardiovascular disease due to the lack of an indigenous environment. An article by Brendan Hokowitu introduced me to the concept of indigenous existentialism. What I took away from his work, Indigenous Existentialism in the Body, was that a colonial legacy exists within the indigenous body, and that the body itself is often romanticized. The body is not passive or distant, but rather an everyday phenomenon. The Indigenous body is born into politics, more specifically political conflict, and this eternal struggle with colonizers is a tension that follows the body at all times. The Indigenous body is asymmetrical and, according to strict, westernized beauty standards, unfavorable and not valuable. The National Indigenous Women's Resource Center states that understanding the mind-body-spirit connection, using its power and accessing its benefits, is the basis of holistic healing. The concept of mind, body, spirit has been rooted in indigeneity for thousands of years and is central to Indigenous belief and healing systems. The mind, the body, and the soul are interconnected, but I feel that the soul can exist once a body is deceased. The brain is a component of the nervous system, which extends throughout the body, but doesn't necessarily equate to the mind. I think the mind is in the head and heart, and it has profound power over the body. The body is the most primal component of being, in my opinion, and is managed by the mind and soul, but not completely reliant on them for its own functioning. This leads into my next discussion. What is living? Leanne Simpson suggests that humans and non-humans are both beings and teachers, and that relationships and respect between these entities are important. My scientific education has informed me that a rock is abiotic or non-living, but a maple tree is biotic or living. A virus is the only entity that was identified as something partially biotic and partially abiotic due to the criteria established by scientists to determine whether something is living. Why isn't water or wind, excluding any plant or animal life, considered living, or at least somewhat, in our textbooks? Air and water hold knowledge, as does the earth, and together they hold more knowledge than humans can ever understand. They do not have literal beating hearts, but do function cyclically, predictively, and purposefully. We need the earth to sustain us, and it, like us, is always growing, changing, and moving. Revisiting my understanding of living, a fundamental concept in biology, has shifted my worldview slightly towards a more indigenous way of thinking about the earth system supporting me. Here we will discuss some lessons learned from evolutionary psychology in the context of this course. The human mind is flexible, but does operate based on intrinsic constraints. These limitations are helpful in that they enable learning by allowing the processing of information in overstimulating environments. Humans seem to be the most evolved or highest functioning species, but many humans fail to recognize their limitations. Humans have impressive manual dexterity and language capabilities, but have eyesight, hearing, speed, and strength that pale in comparison to other species in the animal kingdom. These shortcomings are trade-offs that humans had to accept in order to develop bigger brains, bipedalism, and a controlled use of fire and tools. The evolution of humans over thousands of years can be compared to a cost-benefit analysis, an economics term. If chance adaptations that an organism develops function despite the associated risks, then the adaptation will most likely be favorable and retained for future generations. Our bodies function in homeostasis, a constant state of regulation, so that the body can respond to fluctuations in parameters like temperature, activity level, and water consumption. As discussed in Salen's book, Stone Age Economics, traditional societies operated through a domestic mode of production which prioritized efficiency. Surplus is often wasteful and troublesome, and is therefore not efficient. Our bodies mimic this structure. What benefit would there be to the body to consume more fuel than is needed, or to produce more energy than is required for an activity? If the body is damaged, it is equipped with intrinsic healers that can begin to repair the wound, but these healing properties are only activated in the wounded state. Our body seems to operate based on a domestic mode of production. Article 24 of the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples discusses the health of Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have the right to social and health services, but face barriers such as cost, travel, and discrimination to access these services. Indigenous peoples have an equal right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. However, in Canada and elsewhere, Indigenous peoples are affected by major health problems at rates much higher than non-Indigenous populations. The National Collaborating Centre for Indigenous Health lists many of these health problems, including but not limited to high infant and young child mortality, high maternal morbidity and mortality, heavy infectious disease burdens, malnutrition and stunted growth, shortened life expectancy, illnesses and death linked to misuse of alcohol and other drugs, suicide, obesity, diabetes, and diseases caused by environmental contamination. These health problems are complex and interconnected to colonization and current government neglect. Some Canadians live well, but at the expense of many others. This emphasized to me the privilege I experience, simply because of existing in a Caucasian, Catholic, and female body of European descent. In conclusion, Indigenous theory introduced me to many new concepts which have enhanced my understanding of the world and myself. I particularly enjoyed discussions about capitalism, feminism, and philosophy. I hope to continue learning by connecting with others, asking questions, developing ideas, and engaging further with Indigenous theory in my studies. I would recommend that anyone interested in any aspect of indigeneity take this course, especially students in departments that don't get much exposure to social sciences or humanities courses. Also, I'd suggest to absolutely everyone that they take a course instructed by Mr. Bob Lovelace, as he created a welcoming and comfortable classroom environment that was conducive to honesty, vulnerability, and leadership development. Thank you, listener, for your time, and to Bob for an incredible term. Best wishes for a happy, healthy, and safe summer.